AS220, I saw the walls. I'm like, okay, there's a gallery. I saw the stage. Oh, that looks like fun. I should do some stuff on that. But over, no, you can do that later. But over time, something new started to emerge out of that, and you went beyond giving artists a space to exhibit and perform, but you also provided access to tools. The darkroom is the first one that pops into my mind, and also learning opportunities. And that was, maybe you can talk about when that started, but that, to me, looking back, is where AS220 recognized, without calling it makers, we weren't calling it makers then, that there's a maker community. They need tools to make. Some of them might be artists, but in a dark room, I'm sure you probably had people who may not consider themselves artists. They just like to point a camera at something and shoot pictures and develop it themselves. So these artists who are makers, makers who aren't artists, you got, there's probably a Venn diagram there. So where did that start, and where'd that take you now? Because now you've gone all the way to, you've got 3 major industries there, but I'll let you talk.
Okay, we're all born creative and curious, so let's get that out of the way. So as far as I'm concerned, we're all artists. We get up in the morning, we look in the mirror, we choose the outfit we wear to project a particular image. You're creating yourself every day. I don't give a damn. So let's stop that bullshit about who is and who isn't an artist, or who is or who isn't creative, okay?
Fair enough.
So let's start there. So the primary goal of AS220 is really to provide tools and access and a safe place to take risks so that any and everybody can realize their full creative potential. And I make the assumption that makes a better world, and a better community, and a stronger community, and a more critical community, in fact, okay? So how does that work? So there are many barriers to entry, right? Cost, perception issues that can be around race and ethnicity and class and things like that. Okay, so you need to address all of those particular barriers. Frankly, and by the way, our evolution in technology and makerspace and all that stuff is largely responsible to Brian, so I need to give him a pat on the back. Thank you, we're done with that. But I don't see the stage or the gallery walls any differently than creating affordable access to a laser cutter. I think it's exactly the same thing. The stage basically is a tool. We provide technology in the way of microphones and amplification and lighting, okay? But I think what is most important, and where we need to understand ourselves as we progress through this idea of a creative economy, thank you, Richard, Florida, is that so often we try, policymakers and politicians and everybody else, try to put the emphasis on outcomes, try to predict outcomes. Well, frankly, we suck at that, okay? Vincent van Gogh sold 1 painting and Henry Miller's books were banned in Boston. So we really don't know that much about predicting what's the next great thing, or what's going to last, or what's going to be important. But what we can invest in creating composting. We can create nurturing environments where anything and everything is possible. So that can come all the way from the government side in terms of policy. It could mean something about zoning or coding or permitting, or it could have so many implications around policy, where we put our investments, how we use tax credit incentives. All of that kind of stuff is one thing. And of course, affordable space, addressing these sort of barriers and all of that, but providing as much opportunity. One of the big criticism of AS220 in the early days, and this was prevalent. Once we became a 501c3, and I know if you became a 501c3, you can get some money. Somebody told me that. It took me about 6 months to put all those letters and numbers in order properly. But the first criticism from foundation, and particularly arts foundations, was how do you ensure quality? So we had to craft a response. And our response was very simple. You ensure quality by providing opportunity, because you don't know where it's going to come from, okay? So in the last, recently, the Providence Phoenix, the weekly Scenester paper, said that AS220 was still unjuried and uncensored, was the best galleries in Rhode Island. We have actually got the best gallery award for about 10 years in a row, okay? So there is nothing sacrificed in providing opportunity by any stretch of the imagination. So I think really this idea, we need to really beginning to wrap our minds more around not so much trying to predict outcomes, but actually creating nurturing and accessible environments. So the whole fabrication laboratory movement, Neil Gershenfeld, and this idea from MIT, and this idea of desktop fabrication tools that could be affordable and accessible to anybody. So one quick example, and then I'll shut up and let you guys do whatever. We have a young woman who graduated from Rhode Island School of Design. She became aware of our fabrication laboratory. She took the classes to learn how to use a laser cutter. She came up with a line of jewelry. Most of the parts can be produced on the laser cutter. She rents time very affordably on the laser cutter, and she sells her work online, and she is a self-sustaining artist delivering jewelry to the world, and most of the parts of that jewelry are produced on a laser cutter. And that's one example of many of how making these tools accessible and available. And frankly, like a stage or gallery sort of can create a kind of hub of activity and a sense of community, so can a machine. So we have one of the largest, if not the largest, etching presses, custom made, that we kind of took from Rhode Island School of Design. They gave us it. That's a really kind of interesting story, actually, how that happened. We took it and then they gave it to us. But it was in storage. Thank you, RISD. A lot of thank yous. It's one of maybe a couple etching presses in the country that are that big. We have people. We have somebody from New York coming down this week to use the press. Okay, and a whole community builds around a particular machine. People who are interested in interacting. Now, also our media lab, our print shop, and our so 17th, 16th, 17th century technology and 21st century technology, they are juxtaposed. Now we've got, so for an example, we have, we've taken out of print sort of type, and we cut it out on our ShopBot, scanned it in, cut it on a ShopBot.
Yeah.
ShopBot is one of those computer-generated machines that can route a route. A CNC can route a route of sheets of 4x8 wood plywood, right? And we cut out new press type to use on our letterpress, okay? And we sort of brought back some typefaces that you couldn't find that type for anywhere if you looked, you know? So, and these kinds of collaborations with this technology, so it's not as if the laser cutter, like everything else that artists always do, is just a new technology, and artists will use it, you know? I mean, they were grinding their paint, then they put it in tubes. They said, the hell with grinding paint, I'm gonna use the tube paint and save myself a little bit of time. That's technology, isn't it? You know? So anyway, let's find other ways to keep this going instead of a monologue.
Did you have anything for us?
Yeah, just a really simple question. Do the artists pay? Is this like, you know, there are all these startup work labs and for entrepreneurs, are the artists paying to be a part of this community?
Well, obviously, whatever it is, it has to be affordable. Or then this concept of accessibility starts to go out the window. So there's a variety of ways people can participate. They can very affordably take off one-off classes. There's volunteer opportunities where people can trade volunteer hours and times for access to things. Also, there's in each of the industries, there's a key membership. So if you become a key member, you're also part of a decision-making body that informs the director of that program, and you have a different level of access. And generally, those people, our instructors, generally come out of our key members. So they'll be instructors, they get paid to be instructors, and their key membership fees end up getting offset by them doing instruction.
Is that 24/7 access for the key members?
They have a key.
Okay, that answers that question.
I can't control that, yeah. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So there's a whole variety. We have a very strong volunteer program. In fact, Lee, who came up from Providence, it runs our volunteer program. We have hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, and there's a lot of incentives for people to volunteer in terms of accessing shows or performances or all kinds of things. So.
Talk about the live work a little bit. You've got the affordable spaces. How
Yes,
cheap are
the
affordable
vast majority.
spaces?
Well, loft apartments, if you're living in the, we have three types of living. We have the dormitory style living, which goes back and harks back to the original way that we started living in that unheated building, and we never want to sacrifice that and stay true to that, the roots of that. Dormitory style living with artists is a complicated challenge, always, which is great for the organization to be having to live vitally, so to speak, in its practice. Then we have smaller 400, 500 square foot loft spaces that full kitchens and all that, and then larger 800 foot loft spaces. And they go anywhere from $300 and something a month to market rate, which is still sub-market rate of $1,000. So we have about 9 market rate in the 50 studios, and all of the rest are affordable. So you can get a large loft space for, Lee, what is it, about $650, $700 or something like that for 1,000 square feet, 800 square feet of space or so. Lee actually lives in one of those.
I'm moving to Providence.
So come to Providence.
You should be the tourism bureau chief.
Don't lean into it. All right.
So you mentioned Richard Florida. If you guys aren't aware of Richard Florida, he's a thought leader. He talks about changing of cities and arts-based cities, collaboration. He speaks at a lot of conferences, and I think he was the editor of The Atlantic in some way or form. So there is this change that's happening across America right now, across the world, where cities, we mentioned that there's been some brain drain, and a lot of the talent from industrial cities has left, and now the younger people are coming back because it's more affordable to live there, and they're bringing their big city ideas, their arts way of thinking. I can speak about Buffalo because my mother lives up there, and she was working a project up there, and they're just starting to do what you did 25 years ago. How would you encourage people in this room or other people across the country who are watching this live right now to do the same thing, to collaborate? This is new economy. How would you encourage other people to do the same thing?
I'd say move to Detroit. And I'm not joking. You're going to find things coming out of Detroit that are absolutely going to blow your mind, because what the artists do, as was mentioned, really good. I really enjoyed a couple of the earlier presentations. Artists find value where others don't. They find opportunity where others don't. So repurposing junk into jewelry, to abandoned loft spaces, to funk, right? So you're going to start hearing about things coming out of Detroit that is completely unexpected. And of course, the policymakers and stuff like that, they'll capitalize on it at some point, but they're not even seeing it or smelling it, frankly. Okay, considering the challenges. And now, I'm not trying to underestimate the challenges of Detroit, but they were talking the same way about Pittsburgh a minute ago. And guess what? Tons of artists migrated to Pittsburgh when they heard they could buy a Victorian house for $35,000. Right? And then and what were they imagining in that Victorian house? Let me see, a rehearsal space in the basement. I'll have my print shop on the first floor, and I'll have damn straight. Right? That's the reality of it, Now, as far as brain drain, so that's brain in, okay? That's not brain drain, that's brain in, right? And what we're finding at AS220 now, we are fortunate enough to have 5 institutes of higher learning within walking distance or in downtown. So Brown University, Rizzi, Johnson Wales University, Roger Williams University, and I'm forgetting, so University of Rhode Island, okay? And what I've been selling the universities and what the students are demanding from the universities, by the way, we're raising a different culture of young people. We're raising a culture of young people that want experiential learning. They're putting pressure on the universities and institutions for more experiential opportunities for learning, okay? Well, that's can be very advantageous to communities. When you start to create those connections and those synergies between the university and the experiences that are evolving in real time, in real life, in the communities with those students, and they're engaging them in that way as undergraduates, guess what? It becomes their community, and they're far more likely to stay. Okay? Now, if you also are thinking in this composting idea, where while they're there, not only are they volunteering for some nonprofit organization that's feeding the homeless, right? But they are also creatively having opportunities to engage by paying a $5 cover charge to see local bands, right? Or they can volunteer at the door at that space and get into shows free all month, as it is at AS220. They are beginning to integrate themselves in multiple ways into a community. And as we all were at one time, I'm not sure if there's any of us in this room that qualify anymore, seeking an identity and a sense of place, okay? When you create more of those opportunities and connections with a community for them to be able to develop this sense of identity and feel a sense of place and ownership in a place, they will stay. They will plant their feet right there, So that's my response to brain drain.
All right, I think maybe, is it time for us to do questions?
I have one more small question that's been, you mentioned your manifesto and taking on the elitist artist establishment. I've noticed just a little bit through some of my networks that there's a pressure on not just artists, but I think just all young people, because the pace of the world today, the interconnectedness of the world today, the social media competitive world that we live in today, to create our work faster and get value, like payment, faster. How do you see your artists dealing with putting a value on their work and really developing their work with a slow pace, that pace to really make it grow versus keeping up with the Joneses in the artist community? Does that make sense?
All right, I'm an arts administrator. I make a ton of artwork, tons and tons of artwork. So first of all, I don't believe that you need to compromise. If you're compelled to create, you will create. I'm sorry. And for artist friends of mine that want to keep talking about how they have to compromise their art for this, that, and the other thing, I don't know about that. I don't really understand that. And as far as the sort of monetizing yourself or your artwork, I think in the 80s, we made rock stars out of artists, and there was this sort of expectation created. You know, everybody wanted to move to New York City and become a rock. We were in New York City. Oh, wow, shit. But everybody wanted to do that, and I think we're slowly but surely getting out of that. And we're beginning to realize that a quality life, having a creative part of your life and a creative expression, that, you know, let's stop worrying about becoming the next greatest and best, which is 1% of 1% of 1%. Anyway, just like becoming a professional athlete, the odds are very slim, no matter how great your artwork is, right? But that just making it for the intrinsic value of being involved in the creative process and sharing that with community and communicating with community and building community around you of supportive people and artists and people who want to experience your work is the way to go. Now, does that necessarily mean you're going to make your living off of your artwork? I don't know that art and expression was necessarily, well, maybe in the, you know, pre-Renaissance and Renaissance it was a more practical affair, but it's become, I think, it has far more intrinsic value in terms of what it communicates and how it holds the society we live in accountable and how it sort of expresses beauty and finds beauty in places that we don't. That intrinsic value of art and art-making creativity to me is far more important than what you will pay for it or what you may realize monetarily from it. So I'm not a big, I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about how artists become business people or any of that shit. I worry more about how artists become artists and how they fully realize that potential that lives within every single one of us from the day we are released from the womb.
Awesome.
Questions?
That's all I have to say.
Questions? Oh, come on.
I mean, I have one for Brian a little bit. And then I go a little off topic.
Okay, this was the plan all along. This was the plan all along. Go ahead.
It's a little off topic, but just as an observer of the kind of maker communities and the maker fairs and things like that, and you know, artists, like everybody wants to sort of make stuff these days, whether they're an artist or a maker. Can you tell us a little bit about what you see in the sort of trends and transitions and what people are doing and building, you know, there? That's new.
Sure.
What's happening?
Well, part of my problem is I get really obsessed with the gadgets. You know what I mean? So for me, putting a 3D printer on my desk is an end to itself. So let me just juggle my brain around a little bit. I think I am going to frame that a little bit in terms of the access to tools, and I'm thinking about a friend of mine who is a former toy maker. He was very, very high up at Hasbro, ran a whole line of toys. His name's Wayne. He runs a project now called Modibot, M-O-D-I-B-O-T. What he's been able to do, thanks to 3D design tools and easy access to 3D printers. In fact, before he was even having his action figures, which they are, made at Shapeways, he had me run a few test prints on first 3D printer I ever had, which was a MakerBot Thing-O-Matic. And what it means is that what's happening here, what I'm seeing that's different is somebody who, and Wayne may not fit into this category because he's a patient guy and he's got experience with the toy industry, but somebody like me or anybody else who doesn't know how things work, how long it takes to have a prototype returned to you, we want instant gratification. And somebody who has an idea, I think, an artist who has an idea, is more likely to go and bang out a prototype using a 3D printer at a makerspace or a fab lab, and then get that instant gratification from having the idea in a matter of hours. From the minute you finish your design, if it's small enough, or it doesnn't matter. You could have it printed in 2 hours or less, and I think you're a lot more likely to execute now. I think so. It's not so much the sort of the things that people are making, but the fact that they actually can go from idea to execution without fear. Because if you screw up with a 3D printer like the ones in the next room, people know one of the first questions I always get is, how much does the material cost? And I say pennies. Most of the prints that you print are going to cost you under $1 in materials.
After you pay off the machine price.
Yeah, but right, that's true. But now, and that was an issue until recently. But a couple nights ago, PrinterBot, that's PrinterBot without an E, announced a $300 3D printer, desktop 3D printer. It doesn't do anything very big. You probably print something about the size of a softball. But these tools are within everybody's hands. And I always say, much to his chagrin, I don't think of myself as an artist, but I've started using 3D modeling tools and teaching myself stuff. And if some night I wake up in the middle of the night with a good idea, maybe I'll make a piece of art or an invention or whatever. So I don't know. Did that answer your question, or was it too long-winded?
Trends. You're talking about trends, or where you see things headed, or?
Yeah, where do you guys see things headed? I like this idea of sort of eliminating the fear aspect. Artists, that we've had this tradition of taking risks on one side. So now does it allow people this kind of experimentation without necessarily being that crazy risk taker? Because we can print out 5 little things and try to make it.
Well, you're always going to have that risk of acceptance. People might think what you did sucks.
Who cares?
If you're lucky, it really, really sucks.
Yeah. What the maker technology solves is you can do bigger things. You can do monumental works without necessarily having to have access to a very expensive shop. You can go to a place like AS220 and you can fabricate something out of a 4x8 chunk of wood, or you can laser things together. You can do more epic things, and you don't have to be too experienced. You can take a couple of classes and you can get into it. So the trend that I see is probably towards enabling people to do bigger things, more daring things, that physically would just have been impossible for them to construct. I think the gating factor that's going to happen very quickly, and AS220 is certainly going to have to deal with this, is what happens when an artist creates something that's so big it needs to be moved off a loading dock in order to get to deployment. If it's bigger than the door, but that's, that excites me. Here, do you want to?
You mean like my wanting to design a printer that we can print a dome over downtown Providence?
Exactly.
I want to say one thing about this. I think one of the things that the new technologies are sort of proving to us, I'm getting messages on my phone in the ear somehow, is that matter maybe is like infinitely malleable. Now, if we really, in this whole creative idea and innovation, if we begin to apply that to some of the larger issues that we've created for ourselves as a species, and begin to think greener and how we can start holding ourselves accountable for what we've done to this planet and other things, and using this sort of new way of thinking. And I also think that there's a trend right now to synthesize. There's people who theorize that, the age of science, that was an age of pulling things apart and dissecting and sort of creating all of these sort of Petri dish kind of experiments. And in reality, sort of exploring things out of, this kind of gets into a Zen thing and all that, but it's like exploring things out of context is maybe not as useful as trying to understand how things impact each other and the interconnectedness of things. So my hope, and there seems to be some trending in this way, that we begin to think more in terms of synthesis as opposed to pulling things apart. And my hope is that all of this new technology and thinking leads us further down that direction.
Awesome. Well, that's it for me.
Great job. Comes down to tools. We all have tools, and we all can connect with each other to build our futures. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Do we have time for? Okay. Yeah. Someone raise their hand. Emily.